April 17th, 1943, 25, Zularan feet above the English Channel. The cold bite of the slipstream clawed through the thin aluminum skin of the B-17 Flying Fortress. You could feel it in your bones, that relentless chill seeping past the seals, turning your fingers numb on the control yoke. Inside the cockpit of the lead ship, Thunderbird, Captain Eli Harlan gripped the wheel tighter, his breath fogging the glass in short, ragged bursts. The drone of the four Wright Cyclone engines thrummed like a heartbeat, steady but strained, carrying the weight of 20 tons of bombs and fuel across the dark void below. Eli glanced at his co-pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Hale, whose face was illuminated by the faint glow of the instrument panel. Hale's eyes were fixed on the artificial horizon, his gloved hands hovering near the throttles. "Visibility's dropping, Cap," Hale muttered, his voice barely cutting through the roar. "Clouds thickening like a damn blanket. Flak altitude's gonna be a guess." Eli nodded, his jaw set under the oxygen mask. He was 32, with the weathered lines of a man who'd flown too many milk runs over the fatherland already. This wasn't just another raid, it was the prelude to something bigger, a test run for the 8th Air Force's deep penetration into the Ruhr Valley. Their target, the synthetic rubber plants at Hanover, heart of the Nazi war machine. But tonight, the real weapon wasn't the bombs, it was the bundles of metallic strips they dropped to blind the German Freya radars, codenamed Window by the boffins back at Thorpe Abbotts. In the waist section, amid the clutter of machine guns and ammo belts, Sergeant Tommy Ruiz hunched over the Norden bombsight, his fingers dancing across the dials. The air smelled of sweat, cordite residue, and the metallic tang of fear. Ruiz, a wiry kid from Brooklyn with a perpetual squint, peered through the sight's eyepiece. The world below, a swirling mass of grey. "Pathfinders are marking it up," he called over the interphone, his voice crackling like static. "But Jerry's got his night fighters prowling. I can feel 'em out there." Further aft, in the radio compartment, Technical Sergeant Lena Voss. No, wait, that was a ghost of a name. The crew was all men, but the isolation made you imagine voices. Corporal Jack Delaney fiddled with the set, tuning for the latest from ground control. The fortress bucked slightly as it hit a pocket of turbulence, the wings flexing like a bird's. Delaney wiped frost from his goggles. "Bunch of Huns vectoring in from the east," he reported, "but our decoys should throw 'em off." The formation stretched out behind them. 36 B-17s in tight boxes of 12, their running lights dim to pinpricks against the night sky. Eli's squadron led the 303rd Bomb Group, the Hells Angels, their silver fuselages gleaming faintly under the moon. Each plane was a floating arsenal, 50 caliber Brownings at every window, racks heavy with 500-pounders and incendiaries. But the secret payload nestled in the bomb bay. Millions of thin aluminum strips cut to precise wavelengths to mimic the echo of a massive bomber stream on enemy scopes. As they crossed the French coast near Dieppe, the first hints of trouble stirred. Anti-aircraft fire bloomed in the distance, lazy red tracers arcing up like fireworks gone wrong. Eli's heart quickened. He could almost taste the acrid smoke on the wind. "Flak light, boys," he said into the throat mic. "Stay on heading 270. Window drop on my mark." In the bomb bay, Bombardier First Lieutenant Samuel "Sammy" Klein prepared the chutes. The bay doors groaned open with a hydraulic whine, exposing the crew to the freezing gale. Klein's face was pale, cheeks chapped raw, as he wrestled the first bundle into position. The wind howled through the gap, tugging at his flight suit like invisible hands. "Ready, skipper," he yelled. "Just say the word." Below, the channel gave way to the jagged outline of occupied Europe. Farms and villages huddled in blackout, but Eli knew the eyes were watching, those massive radar arrays sweeping the skies. Feeding plots to the Luftwaffe controllers in their bunkers, The Germans called it Himmelbett, the heaven bed, their integrated air defense net, a web of night fighters and searchlights ready to snare intruders. Eli's mind raced back to the briefing that morning in the Nissen hut at Molesworth. Colonel Hubbard, the group commander, had paced the room, pointer jabbing at the wall map. "This window stuff is our ace," he'd said, his voice gravelly from too many cigars. "Drop it right, and we'll paint a ghost fleet on their screens. Hundreds of bombers where there's only dozens. Wrong, and we're sitting ducks for Kamhuber's boys." The crew had exchanged glances. Eli had seen the doubt in their eyes. Chaff versus the Reich's finest. It sounded like a prayer. Now, as the formation droned toward the IP, initial point, the tension coiled like a spring. Hale checked the altimeter, 24,000 feet. Oxygen hissing steadily into their masks, the crew moved with practiced rhythm. Tail gunner Private Eddie Novak swiveled his turret, scanning the black void astern. "Bogies at 11 o'clock low," he barked suddenly. "Me-110s, I think, closing fast." Eli's pulse surged. He banked the fortress slightly, the G-forces pressing the crew into their seats. The interphone erupted in chatter. "Gunners, stand to!" Eli ordered. "Klein, drop the window, now!" In the bomb bay, Klein yanked the release. The bundles tumbled free, bursting mid-air into a shimmering cascade. Millions of strips fluttered down like metallic snow, glinting in the moonlight before vanishing into the clouds. From the cockpit, Eli imagined the radar operators in their dimly lit vans, screens suddenly alive with blips, phantom squadrons materializing out of nowhere, stretching from Calais to the Ruhr. But the Me-110s were real, their engines a distant snarl growing louder. Tracers stitched the sky, one round pinging off Thunderbird's wing like a hammer on tin. The waist gunners opened up, their 50 cals chattering in fury, brass casings piling at their feet. Ruiz ducked as shrapnel rattled the fuselage. "They're on us!" he shouted. Eli threw the ship into a shallow dive, the altimeter spinning down. The cold rushed in fiercer, but so did the adrenaline. Hale fired a burst from the chin turret, the recoil vibrating through the floor. "Got one smoking!" he whooped, but Eli knew it was just the start. The window was falling, confusing the hunters. But tonight's raid was only the bait. The real hammer would fall later, when the Pathfinders marked the factories and the heavies unloaded hell. As the formation pressed on, the snow of deception blanketed the airwaves, and in the distance, German radars chased shadows. Eli gripped the yoke, whispering a silent vow to the night. "Get us through this, and we'll burn their empire to the ground." The engines roared on, carrying them deeper into the beast's lair. The fortress shuddered under another hail of tracers, the sharp crack of impacts echoing like gunfire in a tin can. Eli Harlan yanked the yoke hard to port, the B-17's nose dipping as it evaded the Me-110's slashing attack. You could hear the wind screaming past the struts, a banshee wail that drowned out the crew's curses over the interphone. In the cockpit, Lieutenant Marcus Hale's hands flew across the controls. Feathering the No. 3 engine as a lucky round had nicked a coolant line. Steam hissing faintly from the cowling, the propeller windmilling uselessly. "Keep her steady, Hale!" Eli barked, his voice muffled by the mask but edged with steel. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the sub-zero chill trickling down to sting his eyes. Below, the window continued its descent. A glittering veil spreading across the sky like fallout from some metallic blizzard. From the German side, it must have looked like madness on their screens. Blips multiplying, overlapping, a phantom armada blotting out the real threat. But up here the deception was just buying time, seconds stretched thin against the Luftwaffe's wolves. In the tail, Private Eddie Novak twisted in his powered turret, the twin 50 calibers barking defiance. The Me-110 loomed in his sights, a sleek shadow with black crosses stark against its grey camouflage, its twin engines glowing orange in the night. Novak squeezed the trigger, rounds tearing into the fighter's wing root. Sparks flew, and the enemy plane veered off. trailing smoke that curled like a question mark into the darkness. "Splash one!" Novak yelled, his voice triumphant but ragged, the recoil numbing his arms through the gloves. But the victory was fleeting. More shadows detached from the clouds, another pair of 110s, vectored in by some sharp-eyed controller who'd pierced the chaff's fog. Their Schrager music, oblique firing cannons, spat upward, shells exploding in lazy puffs that forced Thunderbird into a corkscrew. The G-forces slammed the crew against their harnesses. In the waist, Sergeant Tommy Ruiz gripped his gun mount, stomach lurching as the world spun. The air reeked of burnt oil and ozone, the fortress's frame groaning under the strain. Ruiz swung his barrel toward the attackers, his bursts stitching the sky. But one shell clipped the horizontal stabilizer, sending a vibration through the tail that made the whole ship quiver. "Damage report," Eli demanded, leveling out at 22,000 feet, the altimeter's needle flickering erratically. The English Channel was a distant memory now. They'd pushed into the Low Countries, the ground below a patchwork of darkened fields and river glints under the fragmented moon. Corporal Jack Delaney in the radio room patched through the updates, his fingers white-knuckled on the Morse key. "Tail surfaces hold, Skipper. No fire. But we're leaking hydraulic fluid, and the group's taking hits. Memphis Belle just lost a wingman." Eli's mind flashed to the formation trailing behind. Those 12 ship boxes now ragged, planes weaving to dodge the flak that was starting to probe upward from coastal batteries. The 303rd was the tip of the spear, but the whole 8th Air Force stream, over 100 forts and libs, stretched back like a silver thread unraveling in the wind. Each carried its own window payload, dropped in waves to saturate the Freya chains from Cherbourg to the Dutch coast. Back at the plotting tables in the Reich's air defense centers, operators must have been scrambling, shouting into headsets as their cathode tubes lit up with false echoes. "Ghost bombers!" one might yell in frantic German, vectors scattering night fighters toward decoys that weren't there. In the bomb bay, Lieutenant Sammy Klein slammed the doors shut against the gale, his flight suit iced over, breath coming in gasps. The chutes had deployed clean, but the cold had clawed into his lungs like knives. He staggered forward to the Norden site, relieving Ruiz for a moment. "Targets acquiring," Klein said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Through the bomb site's crosshairs, the Ruhr's glow was just visible on the horizon. A hazy smudge of industrial lights defying the blackout, steel mills and factories churning out the sinews of war. But between them and the target lay the Kammhuber line, that deadly lattice of radar-guided interceptors. Suddenly, the interphone crackled with urgency from the top turret. Staff Sergeant Roy Buck Harlan, Eli's own brother, manning the twin 50s up top, leaned into his mic. "Bandits at 2 o'clock high, Ju-88s closing on the low squadron." Buck's guns swiveled with a mechanical whine, opening fire before the order came. Tracers arced upward, intersecting the Junker's path. One of the German bombers, a night marauder with its distinctive twin rudders, jinked left, but Buck's aim was true. Flames erupted from its starboard engine, the plane spiraling down in a corkscrew of fire that lit the clouds like a falling star. Eli felt a surge of pride mixed with dread. Buck was 25, fresh from stateside training, but he'd taken to the skies like he'd been born in them. "Good shootin', Buck," Eli replied, banking to support the formation. The whole group tightened up, wingtips almost brushing, their collective drone a thunderous chorus against the interceptor's snarl. Flak bursts multiplied now, black puffs blooming closer, shrapnel pattering against the fuselage like hail on a roof. One piece punched through the waist window, shattering glass and drawing blood from Ruiz's cheek, a shallow gash that welled red against his olive skin. "Bandage that and keep firing," Eli ordered, his own hands slick on the yoke. The oxygen mask chafed his face, a constant reminder of the thin air up here, where mistakes meant blacking out at the controls. Hale adjusted the mixture, leaning forward to peer through the frost-rimed windshield. "IP in 2 minutes, Cap. Pathfinders are calling the mark." red-green flares over Hanover. Yom. As they neared the heart of the Reich, the Window's magic began to show its teeth. Reports trickled in over the command frequency. Luftwaffe squadrons diverted to phantom blips over the Zuider See, chasing echoes that dissolved like smoke. One controller, deep in a concrete bunker near Rotterdam, slammed his fist on the console as his screen showed a massive raid veering north, hundreds strong, while the real stream slipped south unmolested. "Verdammt! It's a trick!" he'd curse. But by then the damage was sown, fighters burning fuel on wild goose chases. Yet the cost was mounting. Off Thunderbird's starboard wing, a B-17 from the 305th, the all-American girl, took a direct hit from a Mi-110's cannon, her bomb bay erupting in a chain of explosions that tore her apart mid-air. Debris rained down, a wing section tumbling past like a drunken glider, crewmen bailing out into the night, their chutes blooming white against the black. Eli swallowed hard, forcing his eyes forward. "Steady, boys. We're the hammer now." The formation descended slightly for the bomb run, engines throttling back to approach speed. Klein hunched over the sight, the crosshairs steadying on the factory sprawl, chimneys belching faint smoke, rail yards choked with freight cars. Anti-aircraft fire intensified, a forest of tracers rising to meet them, the sky alive with thunder. You could taste the cordite now, even at altitude, a bitter tang on the tongue. Eli's pulse hammered in his ears, matching the engine's rhythm. The Window had brought them this far, turning radar ghosts into shields, but the real test was here, in the fire below, where steel met resolve. Klein's voice cut through. "Bombs away in 10. The bay doors whined open again, the wind rushing in like a torrent. Bundles of 500-pounders tumbled free, whistling down toward the synthetic rubber plants, incendiaries trailing like fiery tails. Explosions blossomed on the ground, orange fireballs merging into a conflagration that painted the underbelly of the clouds. Cheers erupted over the interphone, but Eli knew it was Pyrrhic. The Luftwaffe was regrouping, radars piercing the chaff's veil, and the long haul home loomed with its own shadows. As Thunderbird banked away, the Ruhr receding in flames, Eli allowed himself a breath. The snow of deception had fallen, and for tonight the phantoms had won. But the war's maw was insatiable, and deeper raids awaited. The fortress climbed back to altitude, trailing smoke from her wounded engine, carrying her crew toward the dawn that might never come. The fortress clawed for altitude, her wounded frame protesting with every shudder of the airframe. April 17th, 1943, now pushing toward the witching hour, 25,000 feet over the heart of Germany, the Ruhr's inferno fading like a dying ember behind them. You could smell the scorched earth even up here. A faint, acrid whisper carried on the jet stream, mingling with the oily reek from Thunderbird's feathered engine. Captain Eli Harlan eased back on the yoke, his shoulders aching from the strain, eyes scanning the starboard wing where black smoke trailed in lazy curls. The number 3 prop was a useless blur, but she was holding barely. In the cockpit, Lieutenant Marcus Hale wiped his brow with a gloved sleeve, the instrument lights casting harsh shadows across his stubbled jaw. "Fuel's holding steady, Cap, but that leak's gonna bite us over the drink," he said, his voice low, laced with the exhaustion that came after the adrenaline crash. The altimeter steadied at 24,500 feet, oxygen hissing rhythmically into their masks like a mechanical lifeline. Below, the German countryside unfolded in patches of moonlight. Rivers like silver veins snaking through forests, villages cloaked in enforced darkness, their church steeples silent sentinels. Eli keyed the interphone. "Damage assessment, Delaney. How's the tail holding?" Static crackled before Corporal Jack Delaney's reply filtered through from the radio compartment. His tone clipped amid the Morse beeps echoing in the background. "Hydraulics down 20%, Skipper. Tail gun's twitchy, but Novak says he can still traverse, and groups reforming. Lost 3 ships on the run, but the rest are tight." Lost 3. The words hung heavy, faces flashing in Eli's mind. Crews he'd shared smokes with in the mess hall, kids mostly, dreaming of home between missions. The 303rd Bomb Group was down to 29 fortresses now, their formation a ragged V stretching back into the night, each plane a fortress of silver and steel, scarred by flak holes like pockmarked skin. The window drops had worked their magic on the inbound leg, scattering the Luftwaffe like chaff in the wind, but on the egress the hunters were regrouping, radars piercing the fading echoes, controllers barking new vectors from their underground lairs. Aft in the waist, Sergeant Tommy Ruiz pressed a rag to his gashed cheek, the sting sharp but secondary to the cold, seeping through the patched window. Blood flecked the cloth, warm against the frost, but he ignored it, feeding belts into his 50 cal with mechanical precision. The air vibrated with the fortress's drone, a constant thrum that set his teeth on edge. Beside him, the ball turret gunner, Private Lenny Kowalski, spun his glass dome slowly, eyes peeled for shadows below. "Quiet out there, Sarge," Kowalski muttered over the roar. "Too quiet." "Jerry's probably vectoring everything they got for the coast." Ruiz nodded, peering through his gun sight into the void. The moonlight played tricks, turning cumulus clouds into lurking shapes, winged demons waiting to pounce. He thought of Brooklyn, the summer heat and his sister's laughter, a world away from this frozen hell. The bombsight console nearby still hummed faintly, Ruiz's earlier calculations etched in grease pencil on the panel. They'd hit the synthetic rubber plant square, fires raging across the target, Pathfinder mosquitoes confirming secondary explosions that would cripple tire production for weeks. But victory tasted like ash when you knew the cost. Up top, Staff Sergeant Roy Buck Harlan swiveled his twin 50s, the turret's hydraulics whining softly. Eli's brother wiped condensation from his goggles, the cold biting deeper now that the bomb load was gone, the ship lighter but no less vulnerable. Buck's hands, raw from gripping the triggers, flexed involuntarily. He'd nailed that Ju-88, watched it spiral into oblivion, but the night felt heavier, the stars colder witnesses. Formations drifting left. "Eli," he called down the tube. "Low squadrons lagging. Looks like Yankee Doodle took a hit to her port wing." Eli glanced at the rearview mirror, spotting the straggler, a B-17 limping along, her outboard engine trailing sparks. He adjusted course slightly, the yoke transmitting the subtle shift through his arms. "Stay on them, Buck. If those bastards come back, we cover." The interphone buzzed with affirmations from the crew, Sammy Klein in the nose, confirming no forward damage. Eddie Novak in the tail, scanning the black astern. They were a family up here, forged in fire, each man a cog in the machine that was Thunderbird. Far below, in a dimly lit operations room buried under the Eifel countryside, Oberleutnant Karl Becker stared at the flickering screen of his Würzburg radar, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. The Freya chains had lit up like Christmas earlier, blips upon blips, a bomber stream that stretched impossibly wide, from the Pas de Calais to the Rhine. "Fenster," he muttered, the code word for the Allies' trickery bitter on his tongue. His operators scrambled, plotting false courses, vectors sent to night fighter squadrons that chased ghosts over the North Sea. JG-2's Mi-110s had burned precious fuel on intercepts that yielded nothing but empty sky, while the real raid slipped through to hammer Hanover. Becker slammed a fist on the console, the green glow illuminating his frustrated scowl. "Redirect Nachtjäger to Sector Delta, coastal approach." "It's a feint, the swine." Radios crackled with acknowledgements, pilots like Hauptmann Erich von Malzahn pulling their destroyers around in sharp turns, engines straining at maximum RPM. Von Malzahn, a veteran with 20 kills, notched on his canopy, gripped his stick tighter, the Schrager music cannons loaded and ready. The window had fooled them once, but experience whispered of patterns, the chaff's wavelength too uniform, the echoes fading too predictably. Tonight they'd adapt, turn the deception against its makers. Back in the skies, the first hints of pursuit stirred. Novak's voice cut through the interphone like a knife. "Bogies at 7 o'clock low, closing fast. 4, no, 6 of them. 109s this time, lighting up their burners." The tail turret powered around. Novak's guns tracking the specks resolving into Messerschmitts, their radial engines a snarling chorus growing louder. Tracers lanced upward, green and yellow streaks that forced Thunderbird into evasive weave. Eli banked hard right, the G-forces pinning the crew, Hale's feet dancing on the rudders. "Give 'em hell, Novak!" Eli shouted, the ship bucking as shells whispered past the fuselage. In the waist, Ruiz and Kowalski opened up, their 50s thundering in unison, brass ejecting in golden arcs that vanished into the slipstream. 109 jinked into Ruiz's sights, a fleeting silhouette against the clouds. He hosed it down, rounds chewing into the cockpit. The fighter shuddered, veered sharply and plummeted. Its pilots shoot a white bloom too late against the altitude. But the swarm pressed, coordinated now, radars guiding them through the chaff's remnants. A burst from von Maltzahns' lead plane raked Thunderbird's belly, punching holes in the ball turret. Kowalski yelped as shrapnel pinged off his armor, the dome cracking like ice under a hammer. "I'm hit! Controls jammed!" he gasped, twisting futilely. Buck up top poured lead into the attackers, downing another 109 in a ball of flame that lit the formation like daylight. Cheers mixed with curses over the comms, but Eli felt the ship slowing, the wounded engine dragging like an anchor. Delaney patched through a frantic mayday to base, the Morse key clicking urgently. 8th Air Force Control, this is Thunderbird. Taking fire. Request fighter escort on exfil. Static answered, then a faint acknowledgement from P-47 Thunderbolts orbiting the channel. But they were minutes away, precious time in a sky turning hostile. The formation tightened further, gunners interlocking fields of fire in a desperate wall of lead. Flak from ground batteries joined the fray, blooming black and orange along the escape route, shrapnel rattling like dice in a cup. Eli's world narrowed to the yoke and the horizon, the first grey tinges of dawn smearing the east. The window snow had melted into memory, but its echoes lingered, radars confused, fighters dispersed, buying them this slim margin. Yet as a 109 slashed overhead, its cannons stitching the wing, Eli wondered if the phantoms would be enough to see them home. Thunderbird pressed on, engines labouring, crew battered but unbroken, the vast expanse of Europe unrolling beneath like a map of peril. The raid's success burned in their veins, a fire against the cold, but the night's teeth were still sharp, ready to claim more souls before the sun rose. The first rays of false dawn clawed at the eastern horizon, painting the clouds in bruised purples and golds. But up here at 23,000 feet, the cold remained absolute, a vice squeezing the life from Thunderbird's aluminum bones. April 17th, 1943, bleeding into the early hours over the Low Countries, the Rhine a glittering serpent far below, winding through polders and dikes shrouded in mist. Captain Eli Harlan's grip on the yoke was iron, knuckles white beneath his gloves, as the B-17 shuddered from another near miss. You could feel the impacts in your chest, each shell's whisper a reminder that the sky was no sanctuary, just a battlefield suspended in frost. Lieutenant Marcus Hale leaned forward in the co-pilot's seat, his face gaunt under the oxygen mask, eyes bloodshot from scanning the endless grey. The instrument panel flickered erratically, warning lights winking like malevolent eyes. Hydraulic pressure dropping, fuel from the leaking tanks, feeding a thin vapor trail that any sharp-eyed Jerry could follow. "She's wallowing, Cap," Hale said, voice strained over the interphone's hum. "Port aileron sluggish. Won't hold this weave much longer." He adjusted the trim tabs with a gloved hand, the controls responding sluggishly, as if the fortress herself were tiring, her 4 right cyclones labouring with an uneven growl, the feathered number 3 dragging like a millstone. Eli nodded curtly, his breath steady but shallow, tasting the metallic tang of recycled air. At 32, he'd seen crews crack under less, but his focus was a blade, honed by 20 missions that had etched lines into his brow deeper than the flak scars on the fuselage. "Keep her nose up, Hale. We're not feeding the weeds today." Below, the ground stirred faintly. Early risers in Dutch farmhouses peering skyward at the distant drone, blackout curtains twitching aside to reveal the silver specks high above, harbingers of the war's insatiable hunger. In the tail, Private Eddie Novak powered his turret through its limited arc, the hydraulics whining in protest, jammed gears grinding like teeth. Shrapnel from the earlier hit had twisted the mounting, forcing him to muscle the guns manually, sweat freezing on his neck despite the chill. The Messerschmitts were relentless now, a loose wolf pack of 6 BF-109s, sleek, predatory shapes with yellow noses from JG-26. Circling like vultures, their Daimler-Benz engines a high-pitched snarl cutting through the fort's bass rumble. Novak tracked the lead fighter as it climbed for a high-side attack, its 20mm cannons glinting in the half-light. "Coming in hot at 6 o'clock level," he barked, squeezing the triggers. The twin 50 calibers bucked, tracers lancing back in a fiery stream that forced the 109 to break off, wings flashing as it dove into the undercast. But the respite was illusion. Forward in the waist, Sergeant Tommy Ruiz braced against his mount, the rag forgotten on his bloodied cheek, now crusted with ice. His left arm throbbed from recoil, but he fed another belt into the Browning, the metallic clink lost in the chaos. Beside him, Private Lenny Kowalski, huddled in the shattered ball turret, the dome webbed with cracks, his flight suit torn where shrapnel had kissed his thigh, a shallow furrow that burned like fire. "Can't see shit down here, Sarge," Kowalski grunted, twisting to peer through the fractured glass, "but I hear 'em closing from below." Ruiz nodded, swinging his barrel downward, the gun's weight pulling at his shoulders. A burst from an unseen 109 stitched the sky nearby, rounds pinging off the armor plate like angry hornets, one ricocheting into the bulkhead with a spark that singed Ruiz's sleeve. Up in the top turret, Staff Sergeant Roy "Buck" Harlan, Eli's kid brother, all fire and unscarred optimism, pivoted his twins with a savage twist, the platform rotating on creaking bearings. Buck's goggles were fogged, but he wiped them clear, spotting a 109 diving on the lagging low squadron. "Got your 6, Eli!" he shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline. The guns roared, 50 cal slugs chewing into the fighter's canopy. Glass shattered, and the Messerschmitt veered, trailing coolant that steamed in the cold air. Buck whooped, but it died in his throat as return fire raked the dorsal fin, bullets whining through the turret's thin skin, one grazing his shoulder harness and drawing a hot line of blood. Eli felt the hit ripple through the ship, the interphone erupting in a cacophony of reports. "Top turret hold. Buck's okay," Corporal Jack Delaney yelled from the radio compartment, his fingers flying over the console, tapping out updates to the group's command ship. The Morse clicked urgently. Position damage, bogey count, 6 and climbing, radars vectoring more from the east. Delaney's compartment reeked of overheating vacuum tubes and his own fear sweat, the set's dials glowing like eyes in the gloom. "P-47s are inbound, Skipper. ETA 10 minutes over the coast. Hold on." 10 minutes. An eternity in this cauldron. The formation, now down to 26 forts, their boxes fractured like broken teeth, wove a desperate pattern, gunners' fire interlocking in a lethal web. Off the port wing, the straggling Yankee Doodle took the brunt, and Me-109 slashed in low, cannons barking, and her starboard outboard engine exploded in a fireball, the wing folding like paper. Crew bailed in a frantic cluster, chutes deploying amid the debris, tumbling toward the misty fields below. Eli's jaw clenched. He banked to cover the survivors, drawing fire that hammered Thunderbird's belly, shrapnel shredding the bomb bay doors anew. From the German perspective, Hauptmann Erich von Maltzahn gripped his stick in the lead 109, the G-suit compressing his legs as he pulled into another climb. His squadron had reformed after the window's chaos, the chaff's echoes fading like a bad dream, Würzburg's scopes now painting clear plots on the withdrawing bombers. Von Maltzahn's canopy was smeared with oil from a glancing hit, but his eyes burned with the hunter's focus. 30 kills, and these Yanks were fat with bombs. Slow on the turn. Zum Angriff, low side, echelon left, he ordered over the radio, his voice calm amid the static. Below, in a forward command post near Antwerp, Oberleutnant Karl Becker monitored the feeds, a grim smile cracking his fatigue. The Allies' trick had stung, diverting half his Nachtjäger to phantom fleets over the Baltic. But adaptation was the Reich's edge. Freya arrays pierced the remnants, vectors tight, fuel conserved for this killing ground. Von Maltzahn dove again, Schräger music firing upward into the lead box, shells bursting in the B-17's bellies. One fortress, the Pink Lady from the 305th, erupted, her midsection vanishing in orange fury, wings shearing off to spin earthward. Cheers crackled over the German Frecks, but von Maltzahn pressed, targeting the limping Thunderbird, her smoke trail a beacon. Tracers from her waist guns converged, one round clipping his wingtip, vibrating the airframe like a struck bell. He jinked, firing a defiant burst that holed the fort's elevator, sending her into a shallow lurch. In the nose, First Lieutenant Samuel "Sammy" Klein manned the chin turret, his bursts chasing shadows below. The recoil shuddering through the plexiglass. The cold clawed at him, frost rhyming his mustache, but his aim held true, downing a trailing 109 in a plume of black smoke. "One less!" he called, but Eli cut him off. "Save your breath! Coast in sight!" Ahead, the North Sea gleamed, a slate-grey expanse promising salvation but laced with peril. U-boats, more flak from Channel batteries. Thunderbird clawed onward, engines screaming defiance, the crew's voices a litany of resolve over the comms. Buck bandaged his greys one-handed, Ruiz reloaded with bloodied fingers, Novak's turret jammed but his will unbroken. The P-47's roar built distantly, Allies closing the gap, but the 109s swarmed one last time, the sky a frenzy of fire and shadow. Eli pushed the yoke, willing every foot of altitude. The dawn breaking fully now, illuminating the toll. Planes lost, brothers fallen, but the window's legacy enduring. A deception that had turned the night inside out. Radars still chasing ghosts as the real survivors slipped free. Yet as von Maltzahn banked for another pass, his cannons live, Eli knew the chase wasn't over. The sea rushed up to meet them, waves like teeth, and in that moment, the fortress hung between victory and the void. Her crew's fate balanced on the edge of the wind. The North Sea yawned below like an indifferent abyss, its surface chopped into whitecaps by the rising wind. Foam flecking the grey as if the ocean itself were foaming at the mouth. April 17th, 1943. Dawn's light now a reluctant intruder, gilding the wave crests in pale gold, while the B-17 Thunderbird descended in fits and starts, her altitude bleeding away like blood from a wound. You could sense the pull of gravity stronger now, the ship's frame settling under the strain, aluminum rivets groaning as if whispering pleas to hold together just a little longer. Captain Eli Harlan fought the yoke with both hands, muscles burning, the controls mushy from the hold elevator, each adjustment a gamble against the stall. Lieutenant Marcus Hale's face was ashen in the cockpit's gloom, the sun's first rays slanting through the cracked windshield to etch harsh lines across his features. He pumped the rudder pedals, trying to counter the torque from the dead engine, the propeller's spin, a mocking whirl that dragged them down. Altitude 1800 cap, losing lift fast, Hale rasped, his voice raw from shouting orders into the gale. The oxygen masks hung loose now, ditched for the lower heights, fresh air rushing in cold and briny through the vents, carrying the salt sting of the sea. Eli's lungs burned with it, a reminder that survival meant breathing free, not the canned hiss of the stratosphere. Behind them, the wolf pack of Bf-109s clung like shadows, Hauptmann Erich von Malzahns lead plane peeling off for a final desperate lunge. His squadron was down to 4 now, 2 splashed by the formation's gunners, 1 limping home with a shredded wing. But von Malzahn pressed, his 20mm MG-151 cannons traversing with lethal precision. The Messerschmitt dove from the port quarter, a silver streak against the breaking clouds, its engine's Merlin roar building to a scream. Tracers from Thunderbird's tail lit the morning. Private Eddie Novak muscling his jammed turret one last time, the 50 cals chattering fitfully, rounds whipping past the 109's canopy in a deadly hail. Novak's arms trembled, sweat slicking his grip despite the chill, the turret's gears stripped and useless. "Can't track him clean!" he yelled into the interphone, the words lost in static as shrapnel from an earlier burst rattled the compartment. The 109's shells slammed home, punching through the tail cone in a staccato of impacts, metal tearing, wires snapping like whips. The fortress lurched violently, the rudder cable parting with a twang that vibrated through the spars. Eli cursed under his breath, wrestling the ship into a shallow bank, the sea tilting sickeningly below, cliffs of Dover a distant smudge on the horizon. In the waist, Sergeant Tommy Ruiz braced against the bulkhead, his wounded cheek forgotten amid the frenzy, blood crusting into a dark mask. He swung his gun wildly, the barrel smoking from overuse, brass casings skittering across the frozen floor like spent dice. Private Lenny Kowalski had hauled himself from the wrecked ball turret, leg dragging a bloody trail, and now manned the port waist mount beside him, firing one-handed while clutching a stanchion. "Bastards won't quit!" Kowalski spat, his burst catching a trailing 109's wing, fuel spilling in a shimmering arc that ignited mid-air, the fighter erupting in a fireball that rained debris like fiery confetti. The explosion's heat wave washed over the crew, a brief infernal breath against the cold, cheers erupting raggedly over the comms. Up top, Staff Sergeant Roy Buck Harlan ignored the blood seeping from his shoulder, the bandage sodden and useless as he poured fire downward. His twin Brownings thundered, traversing the dorsal turret through sheer force, the platform creaking under the recoil. Buck's vision blurred from the G-forces and blood loss, but he spotted von Malzahn's plane lining up for the kill shot, the German's yellow-nosed nose glinting in the sun. "Not today, you son of a bitch!" Buck growled, squeezing the triggers. Slugs raked the 109's fuselage, shredding the cockpit transparency. Von Malzahn jinked hard, but too late. A hit to the engine cowling belched black smoke, forcing him into a defensive spiral. Eli felt the ship respond sluggishly, the severed controls turning every maneuver into a prayer. "Formation, break for the deck!" he ordered into the group frequency, his voice steady despite the chaos. The surviving B-17s, 24 now, their silver hides pocked and trailing smoke, dived in unison, engines howling as they skimmed the wave tops, salt spray sheeting across the windshields. Flak from Channel Forts joined the melee, blooming in dirty puffs that peppered the sea, shrapnel skipping off the water like stones. One burst caught a trailing fortress, hell's a-poppin', her port wing crumpling in a chain of explosions, the plane cartwheeling into the drink in a geyser of foam and fire. Crewmen bailed into the waves, orange dinghies inflating amid the wreckage, but the U-boat shadows below made rescue a gamble. From the radio compartment, Corporal Jack Delaney hunched over his set, the compartment a tangle of sparking wires and flickering dials, the air thick with ozone and the coppery scent of blood from a shrapnel nick on his scalp. His Morse key danced, Thunderbird to control, feet wet, bogies persistent, request immediate cap. The reply crackled back almost instantly, a P-47 pilot's drawl cutting through. "This is Ramrod Red Flight. Tally-ho, boys. Angels High closing fast." Lone, the sound of those radial engines built like thunder on the wind, 8 Thunderbolts from the 78th Fighter Group, detaching from escort duty, diving out of the sun with 50 cals live. Von Malzahn saw them coming, the P-47's distinctive peanut-shaped cowlings, resolving into Avengers, their pilots, veterans like Captain Joe Gillett, throttling up for the intercept. The German barked retreat over his radio, fuel gauges flickering red, the raid's toll mounting in his mind. Phantoms chased, factories aflame, his squadron gutted. He banked north, the remaining 109s following in a ragged stream, traces from the Thunderbolt stitching the sky in pursuit. One straggler didn't make it, a P-47's burst severing its tail. The plane tumbling into the sea in a plume of steam and wreckage. Thunderbird leveled out at 5, 0 feet, the crew slumping in exhaustion as the fighters took up protective weave. Eli eased back, the yoke finally yielding, his heart pounding a victory rhythm against his ribs. In the nose, Lieutenant Sammy Klein wiped frost from the gun sight, the chin turret silent now, his hands trembling as the adrenaline ebbed. The English coast sharpened ahead, white cliffs rising like salvation, the spires of Folkestone piercing the mist. Searchlights swept the shore, not in threat but welcome, flak batteries silent as the forts crossed the line. Delaney patched through the all-clear, his voice breaking with relief. "Home free, skipper. Base is vectoring us in." The formation reformed loosely, planes limping toward their fields, Thorpe Abbott's, Molesworth, the muddy runways waiting like open arms. Eli glanced at Hale, a ghost of a smile cracking his lips. "We made it, Marcus. Window worked. Jerry's still scratching his head over those ghosts." Hale nodded, eyes distant, thinking of the lost ships, the faces that wouldn't debrief. As Thunderbird circled for landing, gear extending with a hydraulic whine, the sun crested fully, bathing the channel in light. Below, rescue boats churned toward the downed crews, the sea's teeth blunted for now. The raid's echoes lingered, radars in bunkers plotting futile chases, Luftwaffe aces nursing wounds. But up here, the crew breathed deep, the cold yielding to dawn's promise. Yet Eli knew the war's grind wouldn't pause. Deeper penetrations loomed, more snow to fall, more phantoms to conjure. Thunderbird touched down with a jolt, tires screeching on the perimeter track, the engines coughing to silence. Ground crew swarmed, fire trucks trailing. But for the men aboard, the real battle was staving off the ghosts that flew with them, the ones that whispered of tomorrows yet unpaid. The tires bit into the damp grass of Thorpe Abbott's runway with a shuddering squeal, the B-17's nose dipping as the props clawed backward, reversing thrust in a roar that scattered ground crew like leaves. April 17th, 1943. Mid-morning now, the sun a pale disk struggling through the overcast, casting long shadows across the airfield's revetments and Nissen huts. You could taste the relief in the air, mingled with the sharp tang of high-octane fuel and the earthy rot of Essex mud as Thunderbird taxied to her hardstand, engines winding down to a cough and sputter. Smoke still wisped from the cowling of number 3, a black ribbon uncoiling into the breeze, while fire crews stood down, helmets low, their hoses dripping forgotten water. Captain Eli Harlan killed the switches, the cockpit falling into a sudden ringing silence, broken only by the creak of cooling metal and the distant hum of returning forts circling overhead. He unstrapped his harness, legs numb from hours in the seat, and turned to Lieutenant Marcus Hale, whose hands lingered on the throttles like a man reluctant to let go. Hale's eyes were hollow, rimmed with fatigue, but he managed a nod, the ghost of a grin cracking his chapped lips. "Parked her, sweet cap, despite everything." Eli clapped his shoulder, the gesture heavy with unspoken losses. The 3 ships gone, the faces that wouldn't stumble down the hatch. The crew piled out through the waist door, boots thudding on the wing, the cold spring air a balm after the fortress's stale confines. Sergeant Tommy Ruiz swung down first, wincing as his gashed cheek pulled taut, blood flaking off like rust. He lit a lucky strike with trembling fingers, inhaling deep, the smoke curling around his olive features as he scanned the sky for stragglers. Private Lenny Kowalski limped after, thigh bandaged crudely with a torn map chart, leaning on the radio mast for support. "Feels like I got kicked by a mule," he muttered, but his voice held the edge of survival's high, eyes bright under the wool cap. Staff Sergeant Roy "Buck" Harlan emerged next, shoulder wrapped in a field dressing stained crimson, his flight jacket zipped against the chill. He jumped to the ground with a grunt, landing beside Eli, the brothers exchanging a look that said more than words, pride laced with the weight of what they'd outrun. Buck ruffled Novak's hair as the tail gunner hopped down, the kid's face smudged with grease and grime, his turret scars etched in his squint. "You muscled that jam like a pro, Eddie," Buck said, clapping his back. Private Eddie Novak beamed, rubbing his raw palms, the adrenaline still buzzing in his veins. First Lieutenant Samuel "Sammy" Klein and Corporal Jack Delaney brought up the rear, Klein hauling the Norden bombsight case like a talisman, Delaney clutching a sheaf of intercept logs, his scalp wound hidden under a beanie. The ground crew swarmed then, mechanics in oil-stained overalls, their wrenches clinking as they propped ladders against the fuselage, peering into the flak-riddled skin. "Jesus, Skipper, you brought her home Swiss cheese," the crew chief, Master Sergeant Pete O'Rourke, whistled, tracing a jagged hole near the tail with a calloused finger. Shrapnel pockmarks riddled the wings, one elevator cable dangling like a severed nerve, but Thunderbird stood defiant, her silver paint scarred but unbowed. Eli led the crew toward the debriefing hut, boots squelching in the puddles, the airfield alive with the symphony of homecoming, engines whining as other forts touched down, jeeps churning mud to fetch the wounded, medics with Red Cross armbands triaging the walking casualties. The air smelled of coffee brewing in the mess tent and the faint, acrid echo of cordite clinging to their suits. Overhead, a lone P-51 Mustang buzzed low, wingtip vortices trailing vapor, a victory roll that drew whoops from the tower. The P-47s had arrived in the nick, their pilots claiming two 109s in the clinch, turning the Wolfpack's retreat into a rout. Inside the Quonset hut, the air was thick with pipe smoke and the murmur of voices. Maps pinned to the walls under the harsh glare of unshaded bulbs. Colonel Lemuel Hubbard waited at the head of the table, his bulldog face creased in a rare smile, a cigar clamped between his teeth. The room held a dozen officers, intelligence weasels scribbling notes, the blackboard already chalked with preliminary tallies, 24 ships back, bombs on target, window drops confirmed effective. "Harlan!" Hubbard boomed as Eli entered, the crew filing in behind. "Debrief! Make it quick! We've got brass inbound from Bomber Command." Eli took the pointer, tracing the raid's path on the map, his voice steady as he recounted the ingress. The bundles tumbling like metallic snow over the Freya chains. Radars lighting up with ghosts from Calais to the Zuider Z. Dropped in 5-second intervals, sir. Saturated their scopes. JG-2 chased phantoms north for an hour, burned fuel on nothing. He described the Mi-110 slashing in blind, vectors crossed, the chaff's wavelength, half the Freya's pulse, turning real blips into a blizzard of echoes. The room leaned in, pencils scratching. One intel lieutenant nodded, murmuring about post-mission ultra-decrypts, confirming the confusion in Kamhuber's bunkers. Hale chimed in on the dogfight over the Low Countries, his drawl painting the 109's frustration. Diving on decoys that dissolved, controllers screaming as plots overlapped like a mad tapestry. Ruiz added the waist gunner's view, the swarm breaking apart, fighters peeling off to intercept shadows over the Baltic while the formation pressed the Ruhr. Buck detailed the Ju-88 downing, his fists clenching at the memory, and Novak's tailwork, muscling the jam to splash von Malzahns wingman. Klein confirmed the hits, secondary explosions at the rubber plants, fires visible for miles, production crippled for months. Delaney laid out the radio logs. Frantic German chatter, Fensterangriff, echoing across intercepted Frecks, Nachtjäger scattered like chaff itself. Hubbard puffed his cigar, eyes gleaming. Eighth's first big window show, and it paid dividends. Losses high, but we punched through the line clean. Jerry's adapting, but tonight we owned the night. He dismissed them with slaps on the back. Medals promised for the aces among them. Buck's second kill, Ruiz's confirmed. Outside, the crew dispersed to the mess, chow lines steaming with spam and powdered eggs, the banter rising like steam, tales of near misses, boasts over coffee mugs chipped from flak vibrations. Eli lingered by the hangar, watching ground echelons swarm Thunderbird, patching her wounds with rivet guns and fresh dope. The sun climbed higher, burning off the mist, revealing the field's patchwork of craters from last week's spill. He thought of the downed crews, rescue launches churning the channel, and the ghosts, the 3 ships, 27 men parachuting into occupied waves or fields, fates unknown. Window had fallen like snow, radars chasing phantoms to the raid's bloody success. But the war's ledger balanced on such edges. Buck joined him, shoulder stiff but spirit unbroken, offering a shared cigarette. "Next one's deeper, huh? Schweinfurt?" Eli exhaled smoke, watching a fresh B-17 taxi out for patrol, her props a silver blur. "Yeah, more snow, more ghosts." The brothers stood in silence, the wind carrying the distant roar of engines. A promise of tomorrows forged in aluminum and resolve. The Reich's defenses would harden, but so would they, the 8th Air Force, unbowed, ready to drop deception and death until the skies ran clear.